Hello, crypto boys and ghouls, and welcome back to the channel, Tales from the Cryptomancer, where we feature content on play-to-earn games on the blockchain, such as Splinterlands. And in today's video, I wanted to talk about an interesting topic as it pertains to the upcoming ranked reward changes that we're expecting to see in May. And specifically, it's around the topic of bots. Yes, those controversial bots that we all have come to know and love. So we wanted to talk about them specifically as it pertains to what happens after rank rewards hits. And we've had a video recently talking about the Chaos Legion summoners and what could happen to them potentially with the changes to rank rewards. But that prediction is really only relevant or potentially accurate if the number of daily active users remains the same or increases. And what we have is potentially a storm brewing where we have to ask ourselves, what happens in the opposite scenario? What happens if the bots retire in mass numbers? What happens if the bot owners take their proverbial ball and go home? Well, before we have that conversation, we should probably understand what the bots kind of do to our ecosystem today. And I want to specifically focus today on what we would traditionally call bad bots, right? The Decepticons out there, right? These are bots that only own a spellbook. Their goal is to simply extract DEC and reward cards for their owners and not really provide any value to the ecosystem within Splinterlands, and that means to you or to I. Now, it can be debated, how many of those bots exist in the ecosystem. I would say probably a majority of the bot farms are that type of bots, but it's certainly up to debate. That being said, a single owner can have a farm of hundreds or thousands of these bots. And the question becomes, what are they going to do when ranked reward changes hit? And the initial indications on Discord seem to show that bot owners might be panicking a little here and looking to exit their positions or sell their positions here. And again, this leads to the question, what happens if a lot of these bot farms either get sold or get turned off or get retired? That would be a scenario that I don't think we've seen in this game to this point in time. So let's kind of hypothesize what could happen. And I'll break it down into potential negative impacts of the bots leaving, as well as potential positive impacts of the bots leaving the game. So if we look at the potential negative impacts of bots leaving, we could surmise that the current reward prices of the reward cards could go up as market supply decreases, because what we know is that for the most part, again, as we discussed earlier, is that the bots are there to generate assets in the game for essentially free, liquidate those assets and provide value to the bot owners. So in many cases, bot farm owners will simply take the reward cards that they farm, list them on the market for the lowest price, and just liquidate them in mass, because it's basically free money for them that they can reinvest elsewhere, either in the game or potentially outside the game. So if we start losing that supply of liquidity in the market, the reward cards could, in theory, the price go up simply because the number of people liquidating the cards goes down, which means human players may not be very inclined to sell their Pelacor Conjurers for 1.8 cents on the market, as an example. So the other thing that could happen, if all of a sudden we go from 400,000 daily active users to, let's say, 40,000 daily active users, and we lose 90% of our active players, potentially, as a worst case scenario, we can see it taking longer to queue matches and to find battles to play, which could certainly be an inconvenience, especially at perhaps, maybe more of the silver level, maybe the bronze level too. We'll have to see. I mean, it's really hard to predict where many of the bots sit in the ecosystem. Another negative impact to us as players is that the retired bots may not be renting power at the end of the season to achieve end of season rewards, which could reduce end of season rental prices moving forward. That could be an impact that we potentially also see. And then for perhaps another negative impact, Matt has mentioned in a town hall specifically that free starter cards mean infinite inflation for rewards. And what this could mean with the bots retiring in mass is that the current reward card values may never recover. And what do I mean by that? It means, well, if you're familiar with baseball cards, for example, in the 80s and 90s, there was a pretty big boom when it came to baseball cards and baseball card collections. And what the companies at that time did, the Topps, the Fleers, Donruss, Upper Decks, whatever's, they just printed mass quantities of baseball cards. So many so, in fact, that they became basically not even worth the paper they're printed on. I have actually a funny story. When I moved just before COVID from my house, I was looking to not have to move some baseball cards that I had collected when I was a kid, and I had a lot of baseball cards from the 80s and 90s. And when I called around my local area to see if I could sell them to collectors in the sports card industry just to get rid of them so I didn't have to move the boxes physically with me, basically the first thing they asked me is what year were the cards from. And when I told them I had a lot of them from the 80s and 90s, they didn't care what cards I had or what rarities they were. They basically said, nope, not even worth my time to look at your collection to even give you an estimate, just not interested, no value there for me. So that is something that's kind of scary when we see reward cards with high print runs. There's a possibility that we never see those kind of print runs in the future. Now, that would obviously mean that we didn't have the player growth that we were expecting in the game, which is a different problem altogether. But it could be that the reward cards that we have right now, the Pelacor Bandits, the Pelacor Conjurers, the Pelacor Mercenaries, the Venari, Crystal Smiths, etc., the Jin O'Shaughnesses become the 80s and 90s baseball cards that no one wants just because there's so many of them. That could also be a potential problem. So you might be scratching your head right now going, Tails, which one is it? Is it that the reward card prices are going to increase because bots exit and no longer provide liquidity, making cheap cards harder to purchase on the market? Or is it that we have way too many reward cards and not enough players and the prices go down? You can't have it both ways. Well, here's what I would say to that is this is really a discussion to talk about the different factors that could come into play in the market if bots exit in mass. And it's really hard to predict what one might have more weighting on the market over the other. So again, both of these could be negative impacts that we see in the market. One side may win this tug of war versus the other just based on the numbers behind one of those equations. I think both could be very likely factors that impact the market. We'll see which side wins, and if you're trying to place a bet on one or the other, well, again, this is just for conversation and for awareness. But what I would say is that whether you see that as a negative could be, again, depending on which side of the coin you sit on today. If you're looking to acquire reward cards for cheap and collection power for cheap, having less liquidity and having reward card prices increase would be seen as a negative for that individual. Whereas if you already acquired a lot of these assets and you saw them decline in price even further and you're looking to flip them in the near term to gain back your investments, well, that could be certainly seen as a negative for you. Which one will win in the end, we shall see. But again, good topics for conversation in the community that I think we should be having and should be aware of. But let's not dwell on just all the bad things that could happen with bots retiring en masse from our game. Let's talk a little bit about some potential good side effects that we could see in the market. Well, for one, we'll have clearly a better understanding of how many actually human players exist in the game if we see bot farms retiring en masse and leaving the game, because, well, that would mean just a lot more human players are left in the ecosystem, and we'll have a better idea at that time, how many real players there are. But just beware, though, that could be a shock to our system as we see the daily active users maybe go down from 400,000 to maybe a much lower number, but something also to consider. Now, the other thing that will naturally happen with the result of bots leaving en masse would be that there would be more DEC rewards from the shared DEC reward pool for players to earn and get, which obviously more rewards for players like you and me is obviously not a bad thing. The other thing to consider is that the new reward structure could provide more reward cards into the hands of actual players, and as a result of that, card sales and rental prices may increase for meta starter cards in this new ranked rewards system. We already talked about, how players may not be inclined to liquidate cards at wholesale prices. They'd rather hold on to them, and that could also kind of alleviate some of the supply-demand pricing that we're seeing in the market today. And also, it could also lead to starter cards or meta cards like Chaos Legion Summoners that everyone needs, again, increasing in price in both the rental and the sales market. Whatever happens next, though, we can be sure that the territory that we're going to be entering is certainly new territory for the game and for us as players. And, all bets are off when it comes to what might happen once the upcoming release of the new ranked reward structure, as well as the upcoming reward cards that the team has previewed recently, some card art on, what all of that will mean to the meta, what it will mean to the game itself. And yeah, this is going to be some interesting times. So like I've said previously, strap on the seatbelt because the ride may be a little bit bumpy and we don't know really necessarily where it might lead us. So if this video has been beneficial, please smash the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel for more timely content on Splinterlands. And until next time, keep stacking those stats.
That's entertainment.